Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm Victoria from Keep It Holistic, where I talk about healthy living, motherhood, and more. And today I'm going to be talking about how to properly prepare plant foods, and this will include grains, seeds, nuts, and leafy greens, like all sorts of different plant-based foods. And the reason why it's important to properly prepare these foods, and properly prepare, I mean soak, sprout, ferment these foods, is because they often contain anti-nutrients that make them harder to digest, and I'll talk about that more in a second. But I want to make this information a little bit more widely available and known, because unless you're following like Weston A. Price or the Whole Foods movement, you're probably not familiar with this. So today I'm going to be talking about how to properly prepare plant-based foods. Unlike animals, plants don't have claws or teeth or anything to protect themselves. So instead they contain things called anti-nutrients, which is their natural method of defense. It makes it harder for us though when we go to eat this stuff. It makes it harder for us to digest the food properly and to absorb nutrients properly. So anti-nutrients can also be called phytates, or phytic acid is a common one, or oxalates. Oxalates are found in leafy greens, and so nowadays it's really popular to eat lots of salads like kale salad and stuff like that, but actually it can be really hard for your body to digest. I know a lot of people that have problems with digesting salads, and they can only eat cooked greens. So that's the reason why, is because it contains oxalates. So I real quick wanted to read this excerpt from an article on the Weston A. Price site where they talk about the proper preparation of grains, and I will link this article down in the description below if you want to read more about it. And I'll have some other good links down below if you want to learn more about, proper preparation of plant foods and why, and how to do it. So anyways, this paragraph here says, grains require careful preparation because they contain a number of anti-nutrients that can cause serious health problems. Phytic acid, for example, is an organic acid in which phosphorus is bound. It mostly is found in the bran or outer hull of seeds. Untreated phytic acid can combine with calcium, magnesium, copper, iron, and especially zinc in the intestinal tract and block their absorption. This is why a diet high in improperly prepared whole grains may lead to serious mineral deficiencies and bone loss. The modern misguided practice of consuming large amounts of unprocessed bran often improves colon transit time at first, but then may lead to irritable bowel syndrome, and in the long term, many other adverse effects. So basically what they're saying at the end here is, you may find at first when you're eating more of these plant foods, they're high in fiber and they may help your body kind of cleanse itself, clear itself out, but then over time it's going to be irritable to your bowel. So it's important to properly prepare these foods. And I also want to mention that traditionally people did not consume grains and plant foods in the way that we do now. Now we're being encouraged to eat tons of whole grains every day. If you look at the food pyramid, it's like the whole bottom of it, the big section of it is whole grains. And that's not traditionally how people ate, especially in most, cultures and stuff. I'm not saying though that they probably fermented every single grain. They didn't eat sourdough all the time, but they did it more often than we do now. And now we have things like fast rising bread and cereal and Kraft mac and cheese. I don't really think our ancestors really ate that. It's a lot harder to digest these foods. The problem with bread nowadays is they produce it really quickly. They have a fast rising yeast in it. They can produce a loaf of bread within a few hours instead of typically it was a process that took a few days. If you're making sourdough, you have to feed the starter and then wait a few hours for it to kind of rise up a little bit, and then you take that and you make your dough, and then you let that rise, and it's a process. So people took a little bit more time to carefully prepare their food. And if you're really interested in this, you should watch the documentary. It's called What's with Wheat, and in that documentary they go over how wheat is processed, how it's often GMO wheat, and they'll spray it with pesticides and insecticides and stuff like that to yield more crop, and the effects of that. So if you're really interested, and maybe you have celiac disease, or if you have trouble digesting wheat, this would especially be a good documentary to watch. I'll try to link that documentary down in the description as well. And before I go on, I also want to say that I don't properly prepare my grains all the time because I'm a busy parent. So sometimes we just cook oatmeal like straight from the oats. And the majority of the stuff that we are consuming that is not properly prepared is either going to be einkorn, which is an ancient grain, or gluten-free. And so we have an easier time digesting it that way if it's not fermented or prepared properly. Now that you understand more of the why to prepare these plant foods properly, and now I'm going to talk more about the how to prepare them properly. And the first thing I want to talk about is just like leafy greens and veggies. It's best just to cook those. It's okay to have salads sometimes, but it's not something that I would say you want to have every single day. I don't eat salads every day. It's more of like maybe once a week type of thing at most. I typically cook all our veggies to make them more digestible. And then also when you are preparing cooked plant foods, including like oatmeal and stuff like that, or a cereal, like a home cooked cereal, it's good to have it with a fat. So you want to have it like, I'll make homemade cream of wheat or something, or homemade soaked oats, and have it with some cream. If you're making like spinach or something, or some veggies, you might put some extra butter on there, and that will help to digest the food a little bit better. If you're interested in making fermented veggies like sauerkraut or pickles, I have videos for that, so I will try to link them somewhere around here for you to check out. And then the next thing I want to move into is how to soak some of your grains, your beans, seeds and nuts and stuff like that. They're very similar, but nuts are slightly different. But in terms of making like soaked oats, I think I've had a video where I've talked about that before. I have a link to a recipe on my site. You can check that out if you want like the written out thing to refer to after you watch this video. But when I make soaked oats, the first thing I do is I scoop out my oats, and I think I usually do like 4 cups or something. Like I make a whole big batch at once, and then we kind of eat it slowly throughout the week. So I make a big batch, and then I fill it up with water, and you want to have like 1 inch of water above it. And you'll probably do this like in a jar or some kind of glass container. You'll want to fill it up like with filtered water 1 inch above the whatever you're soaking. And then you want to add like 2 tablespoons of an acidic medium. So that would be like lemon juice, whey, or apple cider vinegar. I typically, like when I'm making oats, I like to do apple cider vinegar. I just like the taste of it better than whey. So I'll add 2 tablespoons of that, and I kind of mix it in there, shake it up, and then I just let that sit overnight. And then the next morning, then you make your oats. You just cook them like you normally would. Drain the water, that apple cider vinegar water out of it. That's what I do. You could also rinse it if the taste is a little sour for you. And then you put clean filtered water into the pot with your oats, maybe a little bit of salt or something, and cook that for a little while until it's fully cooked and softened. And then, add your butter and your toppings or whatever you want on there. So it's kind of the same thing with beans and rice. You want to soak them overnight, as I've described, and then you'll cook them the next day. I like to slow cook them so that they're cooked really well. Makes it a lot easier to digest. I have a lot less tummy problems when I eat beans that way. And then the next thing that I want to talk about is sprouting. That's another option for properly preparing like beans and certain grains, is to sprout them. And I haven't done this as much, but it's a similar process to it starts off very similar to soaking, and you'll do kind of the same thing where you soak them overnight. But then instead of cooking them, you'll just put them in a closed like container with a little bit of water. You want to keep it kind of damp in there, and then give them a couple days. It depends on what you're sprouting, but give them a couple days and let a little sprout form, and then you can cook them or whatever, you prepare them from there. You want to make sure though that you change the water out, or whatever you got in there. You want to change it out and clean it like every single day to prevent mold. So in terms of properly preparing nuts, it's very similar to preparing oats or beans or rice. But instead of using an acidic medium, you're going to use salt. And I have the right salt ratios in my crispy nuts post, and I'll link that down below. It's the recipe how to make crispy nuts, and you can make nut butter as well if you want. But that's how to properly prepare nuts. And so you'll again soak them overnight with the salt and the water, and then the next day drain it out. And then instead of like just eating them like that, you want to roast them, or like dehydrate them. So if you have a dehydrator, that's really nice. You can just pop them in there. If you don't have a dehydrator, then you're gonna take your oven, put them in there on a baking sheet, spread out, and then you're gonna cook them on like the lowest setting on your oven. So if your oven goes down, mine goes down to like 170 or around 200 or so. You put them on that temperature, and then you let them kind of bake for about 24 hours, and about halfway through, so about 12 hours in, you'll want to flip them so that they cook properly. And the last thing I want to talk about, and this refers to grains, is sourdough. So this is fermented grain, and you can do this with gluten-free grains or wheat. I've never done it with a gluten-free. I've thought about doing it because we eat a lot of gluten-free foods because my daughter is allergic to gluten. So I've thought about doing it, but I haven't. But I've done it with einkorn and ancient grains. And I recommend using ancient grains because they are a little bit easier to digest. They have lower amounts of gluten in them, so if you are sensitive to gluten, then it's easier to digest, like einkorn. It's called nature's original wheat because it's like the original form of wheat before we started kind of modifying it and, you know, breeding it with other forms of wheat and stuff. And it's over time become harder to digest because we've done so much stuff to it. So I recommend doing ancient grains, and I recommend using whole wheat because then you get the benefits from the bran. There's more nutrients in the bran. So I'm not going to go too much into sourdough because it can honestly be a complex thing. I've seen like whole courses dedicated to sourdough bread making. So I'm just briefly going to talk about it because I'm not the expert on it. But sourdough is basically, you can either start with somebody like giving you part of their starter, because you can easily share starter, because you'll know as soon as you start doing it, like you'll be producing a lot of sourdough starter. But you just take that starter, or you can make your own. You can take water and flour and mix them together in the right ratio. And I can't remember because it's been so long since I've made a starter, but I think I did about equal ratio of flour and water. And then you just kind of let that sit, and then you feed it again. You do the same thing, you add more, and then you remove some of the starter, and then you have a little bit left, and then you add more flour and water to it. You just it's called feeding. You just keep doing that for a few days, and then you'll start noticing some activity, some bubbling, and it starts to smell sour and stuff like that. And once it starts like rising up, then you're gonna be ready to make bread. And there's all sorts of different bread recipes and bagels and pasta and stuff like that that you can make with sourdough. So it's like a whole thing in and of itself that I'm not going to go into in this video. But when you make sourdough, then it helps to break down that phytic acid and those anti-nutrients and makes bread more digestible. I hope this raises a little bit more awareness about the proper preparation of grains and how important it is for digestibility and for your body to absorb nutrients. So if you have any questions, you can leave them down below. I'll have some resources in the description that you can check out, some recipes and stuff from my site. And please be sure to like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys again soon. Be well, guys.